Hello, hi Ma, how are you?
Oh, I am doing fine. Is this Balakrishna ji?
Yes,
Okay. I'm doing fine, Balakrishna ji. How are you doing?
good, good.
I'm so glad we're having these Swamiji's lectures.
Mhm.
Good evening, Haima.
Good evening, Swami ji. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
Good.
All right. We've got another double header going tonight.
Yeah, you got two classes, one after another, with a half an hour break in the middle.
Yes, it is.
I see that.
I'm glad I enjoy them.
Yes, we do too. Yeah, I really like both of them.
So, hi Ma, you go to Maharaj Center?
I only went one time in summer, maybe this summer once more. Every summer, Denver
It's
weather is so
quite
cold.
quite far from you.
It's a 24, 26 miles, something like that from me. Not too far, but I just gave up expressway driving. So it takes me
Oh.
like an hour and a half to get there.
Mhm.
That's what it is. But I
She
did it.
zooms with she zooms in.
I just have to sit in a drone, Swami, see, and then just land in your place. Somebody needs to give me a drone ride, right?
That would be perfect. Hello, Chaguna. Welcome aboard.
I hope Atlanta is coming to our retreat, Swami. Did you announce our retreat
I haven't
at
actually.
Estes Park? That would be nice if they could join us.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Send me
Yeah.
a text reminding me.
Yeah, that would be nice. I mean, we could just tell them if they're interested in, they can always join us here.
Yeah, well, I don't think there'll be many here tonight. There might be, but tomorrow we're having or Saturday we're having a day retreat, and so I think a lot more will be present. So I'll probably announce something there, maybe.
Yeah, Saturday, Sunday, you will have more people there because weekdays people are working and harder to get home in time in the city of Atlanta. So
Yes.
you can see the traffic just as bad as Denver, worse than Denver, I would say.
Yes. Well, they say it's much, much worse here.
Yeah.
So you are conducting a retreat, Swami?
Yes, we do a couple of retreats a year, usually one in May and one in September. We rent a very large cabin up in the mountains, up in the Rockies, and we go up on Thursday and come back on Monday. And just have some great time together. It's $350. That covers everything. And then you just have to find your way to Denver. And if you need a way, we'll help you find your way up to the cabin up in Estes Park. It's wonderful. We've done, I guess we've done four or six of them so far.
So you are doing it this May?
Yes, this May from I think the
May 26th, May 22nd through 26th.
22nd to the 26th.
Yes, I'm about to pay the payment. I haven't mailed it. Yes.
And you would be delightfully welcome.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. It's very casual. We get up nice and early each morning and have our meditation, and then we do a puja together. And then we all cook breakfast. And then after breakfast, we have a class and some discussion. And then after that, we make a big lunch together. After lunch, there's a little bit of rest. This is all kind of liquidy. We move it around quite a bit. But then in the afternoons, we take a hike out into the mountains, and everybody breaks off as they like, either into individuals or in pairs or whatever they want, and to go out in and find a beautiful place to sit where they can meditate on their own or read or have a spiritual conversation together or whatnot. Then we meet back, then we hike back to the cabin and have a afternoon meditation, an arati, some dinner, and then an evening class and discussion, and then everybody heads off to rest. And then we repeat it the next days with some little variations in there, here and there.
So we'll be away from the Wi-Fi and everything, Swami, right? Away from the city
Well,
life. City life.
yeah,
right?
yeah, yes. We consider it bad form to pull your phone out for any reason. But we're not away from Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
Because
That's okay.
sometimes we'll do a class that needs to get out to the public. You know,
Sure.
my Thursday night class, I have to. This class, actually, ironically,
Yeah.
has to happen on Thursday nights.
I'm looking forward for that. This is my first time.
Oh,
Really
yeah, it's
excited.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's
It's-
very
it's-
reasonable priced. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we try. That's why we rent a big cabin and not a
Yeah.
retreat facility. And it is very nice because you get a good time to get to know each other. It's a very intimate atmosphere, and we spend a lot of time. You know, I try to keep it varied so you're not sitting there on the couch listening to me yammer on the whole weekend. But so we do different things. Like we have a little one of the activities we do together is write spiritual haikus and then share them, which is always quite fun. You know,
That sounds good.
yeah, it's nice. And then one night's a movie night. We usually pick a night, an interesting. I think we did Into White Clouds one year, which is a story of a Buddhist man's quest to meet an enlightened teacher in the mountains of China. And he meets this man, and it's sort of the whole process that he has to go through to get there. That was a wonderful movie. And then we watched something about the Mount Athos
That's
in
great.
Greece. Yeah, that mountain that has many monasteries on it. It's been there for 1,600 years or something.
Wow.
And so we did a class on that, or not a class, but a movie on that. So like that. We show everybody's I always bring a big stack of books of spiritual poetry by Hafiz and Rumi and Rabia and Saint John of the Cross and Saint Catherine of Siena. So just a whole bunch of books of poetry, and then people kind of pick them out. We share and kind of talk about what the truths in them, the teachings in them that are helpful. So things like that. So, oh, it's 7:34. I'm always behind schedule. All right. So we've been going through. Hello, everyone. Hi. We've been going through the Katha Upanishad, and so we've got some new people here. I'm going to give a quick review. Don't worry, I won't take too much time with it. But basically, the idea is that this young man, Nachiketas, is watching his father perform a sacrifice in which his father is sacrificing everything. And Nachiketas kind of, it says that Shraddha enters into him, faith or understanding enters into him. And he kind of makes the point, like, you know, what can you offer the Lord? We have nothing but secondary stuff to offer to the Lord. Everything that we own is really rented from the Lord. And everything has an expiration date, you know, everything is temporary. So how can what worthy sacrifice is there to give the Lord? Because everything, you can't give finite things to the Lord and hope that he's happy with it. He's infinite. And so he then challenged his father a little bit about that, and then says, what are you going to do with me? I'm one of your possessions. And his father says, I'm going to give you to death, you know, because he's getting pesky about it. He asks him 3 times, well, what are you going to do with me? Huh? What are you going to do with me? What are you going to do with me? I'm going to give you to death. And that's taken as a curse, but we kind of see it more like the fact that if your parents gave you birth, they gave you death. And so it's the completion of the cycle. So he goes to the kingdom of Yama, or the kingdom of death, where death rules. And we talked about how we are actually in the kingdom of death here, that death is in charge. Nobody can violate him. Nobody can beat him. We all die. And so he's sitting in death's waiting room. And we kind of make the point that we also are sitting in death's waiting room, waiting for our time to walk the plank, as it were. And in doing that, because he had to sit there for 3 days before death realized he was there, death offers him 3 boons. And for the first boon, he says, well, don't let my dad be mad at me, and may he be happy to see me when I go back. And I just made the point that when we face death, that's really the first thing we want to, not to die, and to have everybody remember us well either way, as positive. The second boon, he wants to know, what happens after death. And so death kind of goes into that story and teaches him how to perform a sacrifice that bears, and he gives the name of that sacrifice, Nachiketas's name to that sacrifice. We don't really learn exactly what that sacrifice is, but he talks about the altar being hidden in the heart of the wise. And so we kind of talked about how your body is a temple, as we know from the Rig Veda, one of the oldest scriptures, and that everything that you take in through the senses is your offering to the Lord. And so how we should be very aware of what we take into our bodies as our offering to the beloved, and we throw it on the shrine of the heart, on the altar of the heart, where the fire burns, the fire of digestion, the fire that keeps your body warm, that's within you, the fire of life. And we offer everything from our senses onto that fire, and then our actions are our prayers and the conditions of life are the response to that sacrifice. So we talked about that a little bit. And then the final thing he wants to know is the nature of the self, of the person. Death is not so sure he wants to share that information. He says, gosh, even the gods want to know that. What is after the body drops, after we let go of all of our mortal frame, what is there? And so death tries to distract him, says, well, I'll tell you what, that's an awfully tough boon, and I'm not sure you'll understand it. It's more subtle than the subtle. So why don't you take these dancing girls instead? And a whole bunch of other things. He really takes the lid off, really offers Nachiketas anything instead of that boon. But Nachiketas remains absolutely steadfast in his renunciation. No, I don't want anything. He makes the wonderful statement that, all of these things will pass away in 3 days, just meaning everything dies. What value are all these gifts of this world? They pass. And he says about a long life, he said, the longest life is short indeed on the last day. So he turns it all down by discerning. So we looked closely at how he discerns to hold on to his renunciation and to keep his eyes on the Lord and keep his heart pure. And he then goes ahead and gets the teaching from, and that's kind of the rest of the Upanishad is sort of that teaching. And we're on the 3rd chapter tonight, starting in the 1st verse. And that's where we pick up. Did I miss anything? I think that was the whole summary. Yeah, that was pretty much it. So here we are. He was last week we spent a lot talking about the nature of self, the nature of the Atman, the nature of the soul. And we talked about how ultimately everything is one, it's kind of like this whole universe is created in the mind of the beloved, the mind of God, and that there's not a concrete reality to it. That's the illusion that we place on it, that we think that it's real, but it's of the dream nature, meaning that it's made of Brahman or made of God as a substance. God has become all of this, and that the nature of this universe is love, wisdom, and being, love, wisdom, and existence. And so we were kind of digging into the nature of that Atman, and we didn't talk about it last week, but I thought that it came to me that in the talk of the soul, what is the soul? And there's both an individual soul, the soul that belongs to the individual, And then there's universal Atman, and they're the same word because ultimately they're the same thing. There is only one without a second. God is the only real thing, and everything else is an illusion, a play of the divine, God's play, within which all of this story happens, very much like your dream at night. And so I'm not playing with my chutter. I'm trying to set it up here to do my example. So really, if you take your hand and put it under your chutter, this will say that this is the universal soul. This is God. And then you put your hand under it. And if you were to take a rubber band and put it around each one of your fingers, that rubber band would be egoism, your sense of separateness. That's what happened to Eve when she ate that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil is egoism, because ego only exists when you have a will separate from God. And so when she broke the command of the Lord, she took on her own individual idea of the knowledge of good and evil. Suddenly evil existed, and suddenly there was a difference between the two wills. And she now imagined herself separate. And then we break into that story of the Garden of Eden, how that that I hate to do that again to everybody, so maybe we'll do that some other time. If you're curious about it, talk to me afterwards, and we'll go through that story, how that story is a description of this moment, that the universe is recreated every moment, and that this story of the Garden of Eden is a looping story that describes our situation in ignorance based on our following our will and divorcing ourselves from our divine nature and taking on a separation. So what happens is when we take that fruit, eat of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, we become individual, we become separate in our own idea, we become separate from God. So if you put a little rubber band around there, you've got now 5 individual souls marked off by your 5 fingers. But the reality is, when God decides, he just pulls that chutter sharp, that ignorance, those little rubber bands of individuation pop off, and you realize that what you thought were 5 individual souls, one of them was you, in fact, are identical with God in his nature. That image that God has placed within us is not a separate thing from God, that it's like the reflection of God, like your image in the mirror. And so that we don't actually exist separate and apart from God. We borrow God's nature, which is threefold. Chidbrahmananda, he is existence, he is wisdom, and he is love. And so when he creates this universe, he creates it in a reflection in mind, and in that reflection, that is the universe here, and we experience it as being separate from God as individuals. But in the reality, when we awaken, that dream comes to an end, and God brings us all home, and we come back into alignment with that will. We overcome the cherubim with the flaming sword at the gates of the Garden of Eden, that flaming sword being desire, which is what led Eve astray when she looked at the fruit of that tree and desired to eat it, thinking that it would make her like God, having been fooled by the serpent to think that she wasn't already like God. And so we get to come back from the curse. When we conquer desire within ourselves, we're allowed back into the garden to do the final task, which is to eat of the tree of immortality, which is the second tree, that was a second special tree that was in the garden. And then we, who knows, as you like, spend your eternity back in paradise in the companionship of the beloved, having played out this story, this event. So now we're talking tonight about this experience of being an individuated soul. In our verse 1 here, we'll cover these first 2 verses rather quickly just to kind of set the stage. He says there's 2 that dwell in the body. There's one that dwells in the intellect and one that dwells in the heart. The one that dwells in the intellect is the one that believes itself to be separate and apart from God, that it is actuated by its intellect. The intellect is your discernment, where you choose what you do. You choose what you're going to go after. And the other is the supreme akasha in the heart. The heart is in this what metaphor here, the heart is the absolute unchanging, which is God without form, God beyond manifestation. you know, in the Christian Bible, the way they talk about it in the book of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So you've got a little bit of a weird paradox going on there. You've got this word, which is the potential of manifestation, vibration. You've got that both being God, and you have it being with God. And so that is how, like what we just talked about, the garden, after Eve eats of the fruit, she basically becomes separate from God. She's now with God. Before they ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they were indistinguishable from God. There was one will in the garden, and everybody was in flow with it. There was no contrary. So there was a perfect harmony, and we'll kind of say a oneness, a unity. And so that broke. And so here now in this world, we've left the Garden of Eden because we are constantly using our intellect to choose our own path and breaking the laws of God and creating a sense of separation. And that dwells, that sense of self, that lower sense of self, dwells in the intellect. We live in the mind. We're no longer living as the self. We are living as the thought of the self. And that thought of self dwells in the mind, which is the constant, unrepeating flow of change of this universe, an apparent change, a seeming change. And that this akasha of the heart, the self that dwells here, the capital S self, is the self that is still in perfect union, perfect bliss, that is the divine, right? And the kind of a fun way to think of it is in the sense that, you know, God is, the nature of God is those three that Satchitananda. So God is existence, right? Which means God doesn't exist. God is existence itself. God is love. He's not loving. This is Brahman, God unmanifest. He's not loving. He is love itself. And he's not wise. He is wisdom itself. We are the word with God. So we are the verb of those three things. I'm not existence itself, but I exist as the reflection of God, the image of God in the mirror. So I exist, I love, and I am wise, hopefully. So those three things. So we are the verb to God's noun, right? Because God dwells outside of time. So there is no passage of time. God is this moment. His name is I am. He is this present moment itself. And so we dwell right now within that divine reality. And that's actually our task, is to come to that knowledge, surrender our sense of self that we acquired when we ate of the tree of egoism, the knowledge of good and evil, and then return to that oneness, merge back into our true nature, which is that divine nature of Satchitananda, and once again, enjoy that. So in our body, we've got both aspects. Up here, we've got the changing self that's always small and always in danger. It's what Eve felt. She felt separate from God because she was afraid of God all of a sudden. She felt, Adam's right along with that. We can use both names in there. And Adam felt, they both felt naked, right? So they felt their smallness, they felt their vulnerability with that. And then God comes and tells them what's going to happen now. He's like, gosh, now that you've gone into the senses, right? Because she went to, I'm sorry, I'm going into the whole story. I'm on my way, so we're going. So basically what she happened is when she looked at that fruit, right? First, the snake confuses her. Oh, did God tell you can't eat of any of the fruits of the garden? And she's like, well, no, he didn't say that. We just can't eat. And he won't let her answer the question before he brings on, oh, you know why he doesn't want you to eat any of these fruits? And she's trying to, she gets thrown off balance, and he confuses her. With these stories, he says, oh, he doesn't want you to eat this fruit because he doesn't want you to be like him. He doesn't want any competition anyway. And then he points the fruit to her, and she goes through a three-step process, which is the process that's looping. This is a process that we're all going through constantly, right? She looks at the fruit and she sees that it's beautiful. So she steps into the senses and she looks and she sees beauty. but she doesn't associate it with God's beauty. She sees it as an independent beauty, and she's gazing at it. And then she begins to think, gosh, that looks like it would be good for food. I think I'd like to eat that, right? She wants to take something from this world of illusion. She thinks, because she thinks that it's going to make her like God, it's going to fulfill her. So she goes through a 3-step process, and this is our process. We forget our divine nature, that we are already whole, we are already complete, we are already perfect within ourselves, right? We get confused by the senses. We step into them and we identify in the senses with the sensory world. And having stepped into the senses, we forget our divine nature, because the divine nature is perfectly still, perfectly calm, perfectly quiet. It makes no noise. There's no disturbance there. There's no movement there, because it's perfection. Movement only happens when there's a lack of balance or when something is unstable, right? And so that self is perfectly quiet, perfectly still. And once we step out of it into the world of the senses, very difficult to find our way back, because there's nothing to draw us there. And so we get lost in the world of the senses. And so she looks at it, sees it, it's beautiful. She wants it, so she goes and takes it. And that's when everything falls apart, because now she has violated the one rule of the garden of paradise. And God comes to them, he's walking in the cool of the day, and you find out the first thing that happened to them is that, oh my God, we're naked, right? So they run and hide, and then they hear God walking in the cool of the day, and they're afraid of him, right? They're afraid of him. That which is love itself, they're afraid of, because they know they hold their guilt within them. God comes to them, and it's quite beautiful, actually, because God comes to them and says, how did you know you were naked? Who told you were naked? And of course, they do what we all do. They blamed each other. You know, Eve says, oh, the snake did it. He deceived me. And Adam is like, she deceived me. You know, I'm not responsible for it. And God is kind of disappointed, and he reads out a curse. But really, if you look at it from a different perspective, it's not really a curse. It's just the result of what they've done. And the result of what they've done, he says, now you're going to have to scratch and till at the dust of the earth all the days of your life to fulfill your desires. Now that you have identified yourself with the senses, now that you have decided to pursue the sense world for your fulfillment and for your perfection, you're going to be hungry all the days of your life, because every time you fulfill that sense enjoyment, you're going to get hungry again. Every time you partake of that pleasure, it's going to pass, and you're going to want it again. And that is how you're going to spend the days of your life until you defeat this wrong idea that there's something out there in the sense world that's going to give you the fulfillment that I already am in that silent shrine of the heart, the shrine of the absolute. So that's what he's saying here, that you've got this body, and in this body there seems to be two that dwell there, because there's one that is the will of God, and then there's the other that is its own will, and they live in not really contradiction, but conflict. One's having conflict with the other. God doesn't have a conflict with us. He is our nature, but we have a conflict with him because we want our desires. We want the things of pleasure out in the world through our senses, having identified with it. All right, we'll skip down here to verse 3, and he says, know the Atman, or the soul, to be the master of the chariot, the body, right? So the body is the chariot that carries the soul wherever it goes. And he goes on, he says, that's the master of the chariot. Sorry about that. Know the Atman to be the master of the chariot. So he's the driver. The soul is the driver of the chariot, and that the chariot is the body itself. And the intellect, what's he saying here? Know the Atman to be the master of the chariot. Okay, the one being carried, sorry. The one being carried by the chariot. The body is the chariot, and the intellect is the charioteer, and the mind are the reins. And in verse 4, the senses are the horses pulling the chariot. So you've got the master, the soul, being carried in the body of the chariot. The chariot is the body itself, and the charioteer is the intellect, the one who's making the decisions. The mind is the reins, right? The means of controlling what? The horses, which are the senses. So you've got the intellect driving the chariot. The reins are the mind, which is controlling the senses, controlling the horses. So he says the senses, they say, are the horses. The objects in the world that we're traveling over is the road. He says the wise call the Atman, united with the body, the senses, and the mind, the enjoyer. Okay, so this is how we're put together inside. This is how we experience life, is through this. And so that's the importance of being in control of your senses, the horses, and using your mind to control those senses so that they take you where you want to go. They take you, the person sitting in the chariot, sitting in the body, where you want to go. If you don't control the horses and you're riding in that chariot, you're in for a wild ride. And we can see from the conditions of people in this world that you can get a wild ride in this world. You know, those horses can run rampant in all different directions and drag you everywhere and drag the body through all kinds of troubles. And so we want to train our intellect to control the mind so that the senses don't get out of our control. And we can have a steady ride, stay on the road, go in the direction that we want to go, and find our freedom, find our way. If the buddhi, that's the discerning factor in the mind, being related to a mind that is always distracted, right? Distracted from what? Well, what was Eve before she was distracted by the fruit? You know, she was one with God. She was in complete harmony with that will, and was enjoying paradise, you know, enjoying a time of fullness where she wasn't vulnerable. She wasn't limited and restricted in the smallness. She knew herself to be that freedom, that spirit of God, that image of God. So if the buddhi, being related to a mind that is always distracted, loses its discernment, losing its discriminations, loses its, like she lost some of her discernments. One, she lost the idea that she was already like God. God had just finished creating both of them in the image of God, of the image of himself. So they forget that, they lose that discernment. They think that something in the senses, something out there, is something that they want. You know, they like that individuation, that sense of free choice, as it were, to be able to choose what they want to choose. And so she lost her discernment in that. And then she thought that the senses, the experiences, were going to fulfill her. So that's how we lose our discernment in this world. You know, you sit there, you're faced with a vice, you know, and you have to go through those 3 steps. You look out into your senses and you think, that looks pretty nice. I'd like to have that. I'm going to eat it. I'm going to take it. And then you fall into the curse. You now are separate from God. You feel small. You feel hungry. You've stepped into the finite with a divine, with an infinite nature, mind you. You know, if you step into this world with an infinite nature, you still have the intuition of what you are. And all of your desires in this world are actually driven by that intuitive knowing of what you are. You're trying to find infinite oneness through your relationships. You're trying to find infinite power through money. You're trying to find infinite security through name and fame. You know, so all of our desires are actually our attempt to recreate our forgotten nature, which is infinite, in the finite world. Right, and that can't be done, right? We give it our best shot, but we can't recreate our infinite nature in this world, which is why we're always hungry, always searching, always scratching and tilling at the dust of the earth to feed our desires, to feed our ignorance of that. Right, so he says, if the buddhi, being related to a mind that is always distracted, loses its discernments, its discriminations, then the senses become uncontrolled. You're not able to say no to them. You know, they want that glass of wine, they're going to get that glass of wine. They want that pleasure, they're going to get that pleasure. And after you've fallen into a habit of doing that, trying to stop it, you know, ask anybody with an addiction how difficult that is. And addictions don't just stick to drugs and alcohol. Addictions are needs of relationships, needs of beautiful clothing, needs of sleeping in every day. Anything that you are trying to control that you can't control is an addiction. And that is what happens when you've forgotten your discernments, you've forgotten who you are, you have lost the shrine of the heart, and now are living exclusively in the mind and in the intellect, completely whirling around and confused by this unending flow of unrepeated change, right? Where nothing is stable. That's when Jesus tells that wonderful parable about the wise man who builds his house on the rock and the foolish man builds his house on the sand, right? The rock is the heart, is where the absolute unchanging is. That's where the presence of God, unconfused by our wrong decisions, dwells. The perfect noun of God that dwells there. And the other is the sand, which is the shifting, changing world, which is the world where you dwell as the thought of yourself. So yourself sits here at calm, at peace, perfectly content, perfectly happy, but you don't identify with that self because it's not interesting to you. It doesn't make any noise, it doesn't dance, it doesn't glitter, it's not glamorous. It's just security, it's absolute peace, a peace that passes understanding. And the thought of you, which is what we confuse ourselves with, is built on sand, because there's nothing in the mind that is stable. The mind is constantly in a flux of change. The body is in a constant flux of change. And we try and build a life there, and we can't figure out why we can't find a secure, happy, comfortable space that is similar to the one that we have forgotten about, that dwells within us. And spiritual practice is about withdrawing your sense of self from the thought of yourself and coming to know what you are when nothing is telling you, when the mind is not telling you who you are. So you try and withdraw to the mind. So he says, if the buddhi, being related to a mind that is always distracted, loses its discriminations, then the senses become uncontrolled, like the vicious horses of a charioteer. But if the buddhi, if the discerning factor of your mind, being related to a mind that is always restrained, right, under control, possesses discernment or discrimination, then the senses come under control, like the good horses, well behaved, under the control of the charioteer, right? And so this is what we're trying to do. This is our problem. This is where we're sitting. He says, if the buddhi, being related to a distracted mind, right, a mind that, which, what he's talking about here is all of our desires in this world are not the real thing, right? The only thing that makes us like God is to remember and hold in our mind always that we are created in the image of God, that we're created in that perfection. But our desire stepping into the senses distracts us from it via the snake, lying to us, confusing us. When we step into that state, it's a state of distraction. You see, in this world, people, you go and have your drink in the bar, yes, to have a good time, but quite often to get away from the unhappiness that dwells in us because we're not in tune with our nature. We've forgotten that our nature is love, wisdom, and being. So we do things that are not loving. We do things that are not wise. And we forget our immortality. And so we become afraid and define ourselves by body and mind. When that pain comes to the surface, we go to our pleasures. We go to our drugs, we go to our alcohol, we go to our friends, we go to our lovers. We go to anything that can distract us from that pain, because there's nothing in this world that can heal that pain, because that pain is long-term pain. It's the slow burn of having forgotten your nature. So you don't know how to act to find happiness because you've forgotten your nature. You don't know what you're trying to do. And so you're answering the whims of mind and body. And the whims of mind and body you run after, they become your distraction from that sadness, from that pain, from that fear and that smallness that Eve and Adam experience in the Garden of Eden after they've done the deed there. But if the buddhi, being related to a mind that is restrained, possesses discernment and therefore always remains pure, and pure means it's not tainted with that sense of me and mine, that sense of individuation, separation from God, separate from the totality. So purity, you can always just know, just means that. Impurity is when me and mine is added to the mind, and purity is when there is no me and mine. There's no sense of individuation there. So when we can, if we through our discernment are able to move our identity from up here and find the unchanging absolute presence of God in the shrine of the heart, where the altar is, where we're offering this life and everything that's coming in on that altar, we get all of that under control. We offer only the proper things on that altar. We make the proper choices in our life. We come to a sense of harmony with the beloved. And we return in that silence that comes then. That's when the mind begins to quiet, and we become aware of our immortal nature. We enter the garden again and eat of the tree of immortality, as it were. And so he says here, so that if we get that discrimination, therefore always remain pure, which means always remain selfless without the idea of me and mine, then the embodied soul, who's riding in the chariot of the body, attains the goal from which he is not born again, right? You don't have to continue with the curse. And that's why God kept us out of the garden, keeps us out of the garden, keeps us out of paradise until we overcome desire. Because if he allowed you back in the garden without having overcome desire, then the curse becomes immortal. It becomes forever, right? So he keeps you in the world of the ever-changing and temporary, going through your cycles until you find your nature again and heal the desire to fulfill yourself through the senses and through your separateness from God, where you heal from the idea that you want to be living according to your own will, a will that's based on your own desires. Once we've healed that, we've conquered that cherubim, we find our way back in, and we are able to eat the tree of immortality. We're no longer bound to come back, to be stuck in the world of change, tilling the soil to fulfill our desires, which are a constant flow of change. A man who has discernment for his charioteer and holds the reins of the mind firmly reaches the end of the road, and that is the supreme position of Vishnu, or God. Right? That is that knowledge, the knowledge of your nature, and surrender, a complete surrender to that will of a pure Satchitananda, pure love, pure wisdom, pure being. He says that beyond the senses are the objects. Beyond the objects is the mind. Beyond the mind is the intellect. Beyond the intellect, the great Atman, the self, the universal soul. And beyond the great Atman is the unmanifest, God without form, God without change, God without movement, the perfect noun of love, the perfect noun of wisdom, the perfect noun of existence. Beyond the unmanifest, the Purusha. Beyond the Purusha, there is nothing. This is the end of the supreme goal. The self hidden in all beings does not shine forth, but it is seen by subtle seers through their one-pointed and subtle intellects, right? So it doesn't shine through, it's reflected in mind, and it's seen by subtle seers through their one-pointed and subtle intellects. The wise man should merge his speech in his mind and his mind in his intellect, right? So your thoughts, your words, and your deeds should always be in alignment. There should be a harmony between those. They should never conflict in there, right? So the wise man should merge his speech in his mind and his intellect. He should merge his intellect into the cosmic mind and the cosmic mind into the tranquil self. So we're undoing those steps of delusion that we did when we looked out through the senses, identified with them, stepped into them, became small, started living according to the dictates of body mind, got lost in a cycle of desire, and its fulfillment a constant distraction from our real problem of forgetting of who we were and what our nature was. So basically, this is just a recoiling of that, bringing it back one step at a time. You know, look at that piece of fruit, understand there is no fulfillment there. It's not going to make me like God. I'm already like God. You go back the step before that, you stop desiring it. I don't want it. I'm not going to have to reach out and grab it. You step back from there. Instead of assigning the beauty to the fruit, you look through the fruit and understand that that beauty that belonged to that fruit was the reflection of the beloved, reflection of the divine, that that fruit was not beautiful in and of itself. And so you look through it, you realize the beauty of the fruit doesn't belong to the fruit, it belongs to God. You come back to the memory of what you are, that you are this absolutely stable, content, loving, pure soul. Then you step back from that and realize that there is no action or change necessary, but you've moved out of the intellect, you've moved into the heart at the shrine, and in there you enjoy your eternity outside of time, right? Outside of change, outside of time, space, and causation at that point. So you return to that silent self. And he says, arise, awake, approach the great and learn. Like the sharp edge of a razor is that path. So the wise say, hard to tread and difficult to cross, right? Because we've spent a lifetime, maybe many lifetimes, who knows? But we've at least spent this lifetime in bad habits, right? Thinking that freedom was the ability to do whatever we wanted. Not realizing that freedom is to have no desire, right? To be perfectly content in the presence of the beloved, in that oneness with the beloved, to return to paradise. So he says, approach the great, find those. Who are the greats? Well, who are the names that culture has remembered through the ages? All the greats, Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, Moses. These are the greats that we go to them and we say, oh boy, have we messed up. I don't know up from down. I don't know what's right and wrong. I've completely lost myself. And so you go to these greats and you sit and you learn. And it's like walking the edge of a razor, because you've got to break these terrible habits. The worst of the habits is that when we want to know something, we go to the mind to know it, right? When there is nothing to know, if you sit in the heart in the silence of a pure potential and infinite potential, all wisdom is spontaneously available to you in that silence of self. But to get to that silence, you have to pull your identity out of mind. You have to pull the idea out of the idea that truth is in experience, or that fulfillment is in experience. And you have to turn that eye around from gazing at the beauty of the fruit in the senses. You have to turn that awareness on itself, so that awareness becomes aware of itself. And in that awareness, that bliss, which is your nature, that love, which is your nature, becomes apparent to you, becomes something that you realize your fulfillment. You realize how content you are. You turn that love on itself. You turn that wisdom in on itself. It is all-knowing. It provides you spontaneously all the wisdom you need to traverse the moment successfully. And you enjoy this through an eternal existence, a being, an isness that is rich and constantly in that wonderful state of union with the Creator, with the Self. So that the word then is no longer just with God. It becomes God, because there is no distinction between it. If you're not comfortable with that, you can say, like St. John of the Cross says, the soul becomes so pure that it's a piece of glass in front of the sun, the bright shining sun of the Lord, and it cannot be detected because it's in perfect harmony, and God shines through it without any distortion of egoism, with absolute selflessness. So if you believe in a duality and are comfortable with that, then see the soul as a piece of glass in front of the Son of God, the Son, the celestial Son of the divine of God, the light of love, the light of awareness. If Advaita or non-duality is your understanding, then drop the piece of glass and just understand that if you can't be distinguished from God, you are God. In that sense, there's nothing in you that would act contrary, because you've given up that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And you've come into unity. Having realized Atman, having realized this one without a second, which is soundless, right? It's when word is in its potential state and not its manifesting state. It's soundless. It's intangible, right? It's not touching anything else. It is self-contained. It is itself. It's formless. There's no manifesting, right? It's undecaying. It's not ending. It doesn't have an expiration date like everything in the changing world. It's isness outside of time, so there's nothing to decay it, nothing to wear it down. And likewise, tasteless. It's not a matter of the senses, right? It doesn't, there is, in that state, there's one without a second. There is only God and nothing else. And so there's no observer, there's no experiencer, there's nothing to taste, there's nothing to smell, there's no form to see or experience. It sits within itself, content and full, outside of time. So outside of time prevents you from getting bored. That's, just from our perspective, I throw that in because I remember thinking when I was 13 and I heard that I was going to sit in heaven forever playing a harp, I was instantly bored and thought, I don't want to go to heaven. So eternity, your eternity is not a long time. It's outside of time. There is no time. And so there is no experience of passing time. And so you're in bliss just as it is. Right? So having realized Atman, which is soundless, intangible, formless, undecaying, likewise tasteless, eternal and odorless, having realized that which is without beginning and end, right? Realizing that, the T on that is capital. And because God in this form, you cannot say the name, because it has no limitation whatsoever. Any name or quality, any attribute would be a limitation. If you're going to say God is big, that means he's not small. If you're going to say his name and pronounce it, you're going to say that that name indicates him. But God is beyond all manifestation, all word, all description, infinite. Nothing can boundary the beloved. Having realized that, or God, we'll say God, just so we know what we're talking about, instead of just you throwing a pronoun out there. That which is without beginning and without end, beyond the great and unchanging, one is freed from the jaws of death. Once you know who you are, once you know yourself to be the dreamer, you understand that the dream can no longer affect you, as a way of making it understandable. Once you know, once you're in the dream, and you know that you're the dreamer and not the dreamed, right? So when Eve ate that fruit, it wasn't an apple, by the way. When Eve eats that fruit, she enters into the dream. She forgets that she's the dreamer, right? And enters into the dream and becomes subject to the dream, which actually cannot touch the dreamer, cannot affect the dreamer. But when the dreamer enters into a particular perspective in the dream, he can be affected and is affected by that dream. So we've gone over that ad nauseum over the last couple of days. I won't drag you through it again. But if you want to know what they're talking about here, just think about the dreamer versus the dreamed. And you think about your experience as the dreamer, laying in bed, secure, silent, not unmanifest in the dream. From the dream perspective, the dreamer doesn't even exist. You can't see it. You can't experience it. You don't know. And yet everything in the dream is that, right? But you think it's all separate pieces, and you've forgotten that you are the particular in the dream, that you are in fact the dreamer. And the process of, if you were to step into a dream and try and tell the dreamer, the dreamed, that it is actually the dreamer, which is the container of the whole dream, you're going to be telling the dreamer, the dreamed, this. You're going to do it in the exact way here, because that's exactly what's happened. We've become the image of God rather than the divine. So we've become the dreamed instead of the dreamer. And we enter into it, and we have to find our way back. We have to find our way back by just being willing to completely surrender our ego, our sense of separateness, our declaration of our independence to be free in our own thought. We have to surrender that. And at first that seems odd, like, oh my God, I'm surrendering my will to God. But what you come to realize is that the pure you, your pure will, and God's will are identical. So it's not a surrendering to someone else's will, it's a surrendering the misunderstanding of your own will to the reality of it, the unselfish lover that you are, the infinite, unrestricted, immortal, ever free, ever blissful being that is divine. Right. So we get freed from the jaws of death. The wise man who has heard and related this eternal story of Nachiketa told by death is adored in the world of Brahman. Right? This is the winner of God's love, as it were, in a roundabout way. And he who, practicing self-control, recites this supreme secret in an assembly of spiritual seekers or Brahmins, or at an after-death ceremony, obtains thereby infinite rewards. Yea, he obtains infinite rewards. Right, so that's just that's just by the way stuff. You know that once you come to know this, if you share it, you're blessed. You know, if you are someone who knows the truth, and you go around sharing that truth, giving it freely to the world, you know, like the direct disciples of Jesus, or the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, or any of these greats, the disciples of any of these greats go into the world and preach this truth, teach this truth, remind everybody of this nature, and begin to do what you can to help them resolve their ignorance. You are deeply appreciated in the realms beyond, and are the receiver of infinite rewards. Again, not really as a reward, but just as the natural thing of what happens when you realize your nature. You get back everything that you lost when you chose your senses over your reality. You undo the curse of the Garden of Eden, as it were. In return, you get the garden back, which is everything. You can't get better than that. Infinite, immortal paradise in a perfect harmony of companionship with the beloved, if you want to see it in that dual state. All right. What time are we looking at here? 8:24. All right, it's a good time to stop. So we'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Observation and a question.
Oh, just a moment. I'll be right there. We got a question in the house here.
Hopefully you can hear me. Yeah. So when Eve, you told the story, Genesis, where Eve sees the apple and she steps up into her senses and takes it. I thought the Ramayana had a similar story where Rama's wife Sita sees a beautiful golden deer and she kind of wants it. And then they draw a circle for her. She steps outside the circle, and that's when the demon guy talks to her. Just thought that was a similarity, but
I would encourage you to write that article and give it to me. That's delightful.
okay.
See if it works. I'd be very curious. I think you're onto something. Yeah.
Okay. And so the fruit represents kind of desire, sense life. What does the snake represent?
Ignorance, confusion, forgetfulness. Yeah, he basically enters the picture to kind of get Eve to forget that was already created in the image of God, that she's already content, she's dwelling in paradise with her beloved. How so he gets her to forget that, and he kind of does it by just getting her off her left feet. He doesn't tell her anything directly, he just misrepresents the truth. You know, God told them, you're in the garden, you do whatever you want, just don't eat the fruit of that one tree. You just don't want that. Don't eat that at all. And so he misrepresents it by saying to her, hey, why did God tell you can't eat the fruit of any of these trees? Right? So he includes all the trees, all the fruits in the garden. And then when
It's
she's
a little deceptive.
very deceptive, and then when she tries to explain, oh no, it's just that he cuts her off, doesn't let her finish, flusters her, and says, no, you know why? You know why he doesn't want to? Because he knows that it will make you wise. It's going to make you like him. And she's like, what? What do you? And he says, and he doesn't want you to be like him because he doesn't want competition. He doesn't want anybody to have what he has. So he builds this whole thing, just by keeping her off on her left foot, until she, in her bewilderment, gets deluded, gets confused. And then she turns to the senses, sees that beautiful fruit there, and she heard what he said, didn't agree with it, but now she's enthralled. She's looking through the senses with a sense of ignorance, like, ooh, well, wait a minute, you're right. That's a pretty nice looking fruit.
Snake seems like Maya personified.
Yeah, it's ignorance. It's just the method for how ignorance enters into the world. How did forgetfulness, ignorance, forgetfulness of our nature ever happen?
I
Yes.
just want to add to the snake thing, like it's also like maybe like the lie as well. It's like with the snake, the way it kind of traverses on the ground. It's similar, just also our neurological network as well. Like, I mean, well, a snake, it's also if it tightens around you and you try to resist it, it'll tighten itself more, kind of like the mind. So I saw it as like a metaphor of the mind.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The active mind, the mind that has me in mind, entered into it, where the small self dwells, dwelling in the thought of itself. Thank you. That's very good. I like that. I could probably get a lot more from you actually on that. I think we should talk. Perfect. Oh yes, and someone online had a question.
That
What was
was me, Pranam. I just wanted to ask, I wrote it down because sometimes I'm not very good at wording things. But what if we love, and this might be a strange question, but what if we love ultimately suffering in our human existence? Do we have some sort of spiritual Stockholm syndrome, or like what? Because you said, you talked about being afraid to go to heaven, and I resonate with that because I have found the joy in living, and I don't know if I want to go anywhere, but I do want to go there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Discernment, really just a constant going inside and watching the processes within you, going in and finding out who you are, watching, because the joy of life, yes, that ultimately, that's what Vivekananda says is the whole point of religion. He says religion isn't there to deny you the enjoyment of life. Religion is there to teach you how to enjoy life so that you don't get caught, right? Because if we're ignorant, right, if we're deluded, we can enjoy things partially, but for all the enjoyment we have, there's an equivalent amount of suffering, the yin and the yang of this world. This world is a balance. And so you can't enjoy without pain, because you cannot know joy without pain. If you don't, this is a relative world, and that's the horrible thing about it, is that you don't know what joy is without the pain to contrast it. You don't.
I wrote that down actually. I said, I understand, like in my little notes that I wrote myself, I wrote to myself, like, I understand that the benefit of being free of samsara would be that the suffering goes away. But in my little human mind, I guess come to be like, but what if the suffering's okay in exchange for all of the other things that we get to do? Are we allowed to forfeit our moksha?
Yes, we have. We have. We're not free, because we're constantly having to fulfill our desires, the whims of the body and the whims of the mind. And we're caught in that wheel of samsara. And yes, we can stay here as long as you want. This word with God exists eternally also. You know, fire and its power to burn are always there. So yes, you can have either one. And if this is what you want, this is what you will get. But you know, God might at some point whisper in your ear, hey, why don't you try this? And then you can compare the two and make a wise decision about which one you really want. Because right now you're making a decision with only knowing half of the choices. Right.
I thought about that as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, that was a thought that crossed my mind as well, was that, like, I sit here and I think, like, well, I really enjoy my human existence. And then the other, you know, the little scratch in my brain is like, well, you don't know what the other part is. So how can you say that you do genuinely enjoy it? What if there is, so.
Yeah.
that kind
Well,
of thing.
you know, there's no reason to talk you out of it. That will be fine, and you're going to move forward just because I can tell you're discerning and you're thinking and you're wondering about these things, and that just keep going with that, and you'll move forward in it. What you're going to find ultimately, though, is something quite beautiful, is that everything that you're enjoying in the world, you're enjoying because it has an attribute of the beloved, of the divine in it, right? And in our ignorant state, we're always having to run after something in order to get that attribute of God, to enjoy it. And what realization is to understand that that attribute of God that you had hidden in the objects of the senses actually was a reflection of the true enjoyment of it, which was within you. And so in realization, you don't have to stop enjoying the world. In realization, you enjoy what you were looking for in the world without end, without break, without ceasing. And so it's not that you're giving up one for the other. You're realizing that you've been falling in love with a mirror, and you come to know that it's you in the mirror that you've been falling in love with, and you no longer need the mirror. You no longer need to sit there and kiss the piece of glass and trying to enjoy that love of that love of self in the mirror, right? And so that's the ultimate of it. But just keep, you know, all of this is kind of by the way. Follow the teachings and go do the practice within, and sort it out by exactly what you're doing, and take a look at things. You know, you're looking for love, and what if you were to find out that you already had it in an infinite quantity that doesn't end and that doesn't diminish? Then you wouldn't have to go out and beg for it from the world anymore. Go and find out that you have an infinite wisdom available within you that's spontaneously ready to guide you in every moment, and you won't have to run out and chase it in little pieces through the five senses from the world. You won't have to be the beggar of the world. And your immortality, you won't have to hang out at the plastic surgeon's house. You won't have to hang out and wait for the new drug that's going to add 10 years to your life. You can let the body drop off without any fear, knowing that you never were this limited, aging, decaying thing, that you were ever free and ever blissful. And once you come to know those things, you come to realize that all of the things you were enjoying in little tiny bits and pieces as the senses metered them out to you were actually just morsels of your very own self that you never needed to beg for and you never had lost to begin with. And the deal just keeps getting better and better and better from there on, because with the divine, one of my favorite thoughts in a meditation one time was the realization. It's actually because Swami Brahmananda said that you know, nirvikalpa samadhi, that's the highest samadhi that we as a mortal being can know. And he makes the statement that spiritual life begins at nirvikalpa samadhi. You know, and I sat there thinking, how can the highest realization potentially available to us be just the beginning? And I sat there and I really meditated on that. And just kind of one of the ideas that arose that I found wonderful and beautiful and just very, very satisfying was this notion that my falling in love with God is never going to end. That if I just keep it in the world of metaphor, so that I can say these things about the relationship between me and God without violating any principles or scriptural ideals, that you are going to fall in love with this lover more every time you look at her or him forever. You're going to get deeper and deeper and more overwhelmed and more blissed out and more happy about the relationship and more excited about its future every single moment forever. That's going to be a hard thing to get rid of. That's going to be a hard thing to beat. And again, that's all just metaphor, mixing the world of senses with the divine world, which is utterly illegal to do if I was teaching truth in it. But I'm doing a pointing at this reality, that the way that this nirvikalpa samadhi can become the beginning of spiritual life is to understand that this love that we're falling into is infinite. And really, no matter how long we've done it, it's still going to be the beginning.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was very insightful, and that did help answer my question.
Certainly. Anyone else? Yes, Frank.
I have two questions in one that I never thought of before until you told the story this way. It's funny how you can hear something 5,000 times and it's still different. But I had these two.
Thank you.
But it's interesting because when you were talking about it, my two thoughts were, if God knows everything,
Mm-hmm.
didn't in essence God know that Adam and Eve were going to do that? That was my one part of my thought. Like, didn't he already know before all this that this was going to happen, that they were going to do that? And the other part of the thought was, if he knew they were going to do that, and or he put them in that garden knowing that tree was there, in essence, and God is everything, in essence, didn't God tempt them before the devil? Or, well, I'm sorry, not the devil, the snake, sorry. It's my Christian coming out. It jumps out every once in a while. So that's my two things. Like, didn't God know? And in essence, wasn't the God the one who, in essence, tempted them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes to all of that.
Okay.
But isn't God ultimately Adam and Eve as well?
Yes.
So he's doing it only to himself, his own self. And
So in essence, did God, to put it in the basic terms, did God want this to happen, for the experience to take place? You know, the separation to take place, for it to move forward in that direction for whatever reason?
That is the one unanswerable question.
Okay.
What was the initial cause? With that the first domino to fall, what knocked it over? There's not an answer for that. And the sages say that the answer lies outside of our ability to understand, because it doesn't fall into the requirements of mind to be cognated, to be conceived of.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to wake up to know the answer to that question. But ultimately, that's it. There's many made up answers. The sages, this is the play of God. God is wanting to experience himself. This is, God was bored with eternity as perfection and thought, hey, let's mix it up and give some delusion to the puzzle. There's all kinds of explanations offered in the scriptures, but they all say that they're really just placeholders for satisfaction, that this is an unknowable from inside the dream. You have to wake up to know that answer. Like that, just like you have to let go of the dream to know who you are. You have to let go of the dream to know that you're the dreamer, and you have to step outside the dream to know what that means, as it were. Yeah. The story, again, the story itself is metaphor for something, beyond that. because we know this world is, that this world is unreal. Right? What time is it?
8:40.
Okay, I don't have to do class until 9. Somebody's sending a text. Okay. Yes, all right. Right. Do I have to go into the bucket of potting soil? Do I have to throw all of my cliches into one class? Right. Okay. I'll go forward. Stop not. I don't. Be well. Jai Ma.